Show on the road. Chapter 6. Empty chambers, barred windows, the great endless sweep of the night above the battlements. That is all I found above ground. But on the lower floor of the tower, just outside the door to the dungeon stairs, there was a resin torch in the sconce, and a tinder box in the niche beside it. Tracks in the dust. The lock well oiled and easy to turn when I finally found the right key for it. I shone the torch before me on a narrow screw stairway and started down, a little repelled by a stench that rose from somewhere quite far below me. Of course, I knew that stench. It was common enough in every cemetery in Paris. In Les Innocents, it was thick as noxious gas, and you had to live with it to shop the stalls there, deal with the letter writers. It was the stench of decomposing bodies, and though it sickened me, made me back up a few steps, it wasn't all that strong, and the odor of the burning resin helped to subdue it. I went on down. If there were dead mortals here, well, I couldn't run away from them. But on the first level beneath the ground, I found no corpses, only a vast, cool burial chamber with its rusted iron doors open to the stairs, and 3 giant stone sarcophagi in the center of it. It was very like Magnus's cell above, only much larger. It had the same low curved ceiling, the same crude and gaping fireplace. And what could that mean, except that other vampires had once slept here? No one puts fireplaces in burial vaults, at least not that I had ever known. And there were even stone benches here, and the sarcophagi were like the one above, with great figures carved on them. But years of dust overlay everything, and there were so many spiderwebs. Surely no vampires dwelled here now. Quite impossible. Yes, it was very strange. Where were those who had lain in these coffins? Had they burnt themselves up like Magnus? Or were they still existing somewhere? I went in and opened the sarcophagi one by one. Nothing but dust inside. No evidence of other vampires at all. No indication that any vampires existed. I went out and continued down the stairway, even though the smell of the decay grew stronger and stronger. In fact, it very quickly became unbearable. It was coming from behind a door that I could see below, and I had real difficulty in making myself approach it. Of course, as a mortal man, I'd loathed the smell, but that was nothing to the aversion I felt now. My new body wanted to run from it. I stopped, took a deep breath, and forced myself towards the door, determined to see what the fiend had done here. Well, the stench was nothing to the sight of it. In a deep prison cell lay a heap of corpses in all states of decay, the bones and rotted flesh crawling with worms and insects. Rats ran from the light of the torch, brushing past my legs as they made for the stairs, and my nausea became a knot in my throat. The stench suffocated me. But I couldn't stop staring at these bodies. There was something important here, something terribly important, to be realized. And it came to me suddenly that all these dead victims had been men. Their boots and ragged clothing gave evidence of that. And every single one of them had yellow hair, very much like my own hair. The few who had features left appeared to be young men, tall, slight of build. And the most recent occupant here, the wet and reeking corpse that lay with its arms outstretched through the bars, so resembled me that he might have been a brother. In a daze, I moved forward until the tip of my boot touched his head. I lowered the torch, my mouth opening as if to scream. The wet, sticky eyes that swarmed with gnats were blue eyes. I stumbled backwards. A wild fear gripped me that the thing would move, grab hold of my ankle, and I knew why it would. As I drew up against the wall, I tipped on a plate of rotted wood and a pitcher. The pitcher went over and broke, and out of it the curdled milk spilled like vomit. Pain circled my ribs. Blood came up like liquid fire into my mouth, and it shot out of my lips, splashing on the floor in front of me. I had to reach for the open door to steady myself, but through the haze of nausea I stared at the blood. I stared at the gorgeous crimson color of it in the light of the torch. I watched the blood darken as it sank into the mortar between the stones. The blood was alive, and the sweet smell of it cut like a blade through the stench of the dead. Spasms of thirst drove away the nausea. My back was arching. I was bending lower and lower to the blood, and with astonishing elasticity. And all the while my thoughts raced. This young man had been alive in this cell. This rotted food and milk were here either to nourish or torment him. He had died in the cell, trapped with those corpses, knowing full well he would soon be one of them. God, to suffer like that. To suffer that. And how many others had known exactly the same fate? Young men with yellow hair, all of them. I was down on my knees and bending over. I held the torch low with my left hand, and my head went all the way down to the blood, my tongue flashing out of my mouth so that I saw it like the tongue of a lizard. It scraped at the blood on the floor, shivers of ecstasy. Oh, too lovely. Was I doing this? Was I lapping up this blood not 2 inches from this dead body? Was my heart heaving with every taste not 2 inches from this dead boy whom Magnus had brought here as he brought me? This boy that Magnus had then condemned to death instead of immortality. The filthy cell flickered on and off like a flame as I licked up the blood. The dead man's hair touched my forehead. His eye, like a fractured crystal, stared at me. Why wasn't I locked in this cell? What test had I passed that I was not screaming now as I shook the bars, the horror that I had foreseen in the village inn slowly closing in on me? The blood tremors passed through my arms and legs, and the sound I heard, the gorgeous sound, as enthralling as the crimson of the blood, the blue of the boy's eye, the glistening wings of the gnat, the sliding opaline body of the worm, the blaze of the torch, was my own raw and guttural screaming. I dropped the torch and struggled backwards on my knees, crashing against the tin plate and the broken pitcher. I climbed to my feet and ran up the stairway, and as I slammed shut the dungeon door, my screams rose up and up to the very top of the tower. I was lost in the sound as it bounced off the stones and came back at me. I couldn't stop. I couldn't close my mouth or cover it. But through the barred entranceway and through a dozen narrow windows above, I saw the unmistakable light of morning coming. My screams died. The stones had begun to glow. The light seeped around me like scalding steam, burning my eyelids. I made no decision to run. I was simply doing it, running up and up to the inner chamber. As I came out of the passage, the room was full of a dim purple fire. The jewels overflowing the chest appeared to be moving. I was almost blind as I lifted the lid of the sarcophagus. Quickly, it fell into place above me. The pain in my face and hands died away, and I was still, and I was safe, and fear and sorrow melted into a cool and fathomless darkness. Chapter 7. It was thirst that awakened me, and I knew at once where I was, and what I was, too. There were no sweet mortal dreams of chilled white wine or the fresh green grass beneath the apple trees in my father's orchard. In the narrow darkness of the stone coffin, I felt of my fangs with my fingers and found them dangerously long and keen as little knife blades. An immortal was in the tower, and though he hadn't reached the door of the outer chamber, I could hear his thoughts. I heard his consternation when he discovered the door to the stairs unlocked. That had never happened before. I heard his fear as he discovered the burnt timbers on the floor and called out, "Master." A servant was what he was, and a somewhat treacherous one at that. It fascinated me, this soundless hearing of his mind, but something else was disturbing me. It was his scent. I lifted the stone lid of the sarcophagus and climbed out. The scent was faint, but it was almost irresistible. It was the musky smell of the first whore in whose bed I had spent my passion. It was the roasted venison after days and days of starvation in winter. It was new wine, or fresh apples, or water roaring over the cliff's edge on a hot day when I reached out to gulp it in handfuls. Only it was immeasurably richer than that. The scent and the appetite that wanted it was infinitely keener and more simple. I moved through the secret tunnel like a creature swimming through the darkness, and pushing out the stone in the outer chamber, rose to my feet. There stood the mortal, staring at me, his face pale with shock. An old, withered man he was, and by some indefinable tangle of considerations in his mind, I knew he was a stable master and a coachman. But the hearing of this was maddeningly imprecise. Then the immediate malice he felt towards me came like the heat of a stove, and there was no misunderstanding that. His eyes raced over my face and form. The hatred boiled, crested. It was he who had procured the fine clothes I wore. He who had tended the unfortunates in the dungeon while they had lived. And while he demanded in silent outrage, was I not there? And why, he demanded in silent outrage, was I not there? This made me love him very much, as you can imagine. I could have crushed him to death in my bare hands for this. "The master," he said desperately. "Where is he? Master!" But what did he think the master was? A sorcerer of some king? That was what he thought. And now I had the power. In sum, he didn't know anything that would be of use to me. But as I comprehended all this, as I drank it up from his mind, quite against his will, I was becoming entranced with the veins in his face and in his hands, and that smell was intoxicating me. I could feel the dim throbbing of his heart, and then I could taste his blood, just what it would be like, and there came to me some full-blown sense of it, rich and hot as it filled me. "The master's gone, burned in the fire," I murmured, hearing a strange monotone coming from myself. I moved slowly towards him. He glanced at the blackened floor. He looked up at the blackened ceiling. "No, this is a lie," he said. He was outraged, and his anger pulsed like a light in his eye. I felt the bitterness of his mind and its desperate reasoning. Ah, but that living flesh could look like this. I was in the grip of remorseless appetite. And he knew it. In some wild and unreasoning way, he sensed it, and throwing me one last malevolent glance, he ran for the stairway. Immediately, I caught him. In fact, I enjoyed catching him, so simple it was. One instant, I was willing myself to reach out and close the distance between us. The next, I had him helpless in my hands, holding him off the floor so that his feet swung free, straining to kick me. I held him as easily as a powerful man might hold a child. That was the proportion. His mind was a jumble of frantic thoughts, but he seemed unable to decide upon any course to save himself. But the faint humming of these thoughts was being obliterated by the vision he presented to me. His eyes weren't the portals of his soul any more. They were gelatinous orbs whose colors tantalized me. And his body was nothing but a writhing morsel of hot flesh and blood that I must have or die without. It horrified me that this food should be alive, that delicious blood should flow through these struggling arms and fingers, and then it seemed perfect that it should. He was what he was, and I was what I was, and I was going to feast upon him. I pulled him to my lips. I tore the bulging artery in his neck. The blood hit the roof of my mouth. I gave a little cry as I crushed him against me. It wasn't the burning fluid the master's blood had been, not that lovely elixir I had drunk from the stones of the dungeon. No, that had been light itself made liquid. Rather, this was 1,000 times more luscious, tasting of the thick human heart that pumped it, the very essence of that hot, almost smoky scent. I could feel my shoulders rising, my fingers biting deeper into his flesh, and almost a humming sound rising out of me. No vision but that of this tiny, gasping soul, but a swoon so powerful that he himself, what he was, had no part in it. It was with all my will that, before the final moment, I forced him away. How I wanted to feel his heart stop. How I wanted to feel the beat slow and cease and know I possessed him. But I didn't dare. He slipped heavily from my arms, his limbs sprawling out on the stones, the whites of his eyes showing beneath his half-closed eyelids. And I found myself unable to turn away from his death, mutely fascinated by it. Not the smallest detail must escape me. I heard his breath give out. I saw the body relax into death without struggle. The blood warmed me. I felt it beating in my veins. My face was hot against the palms of my hands. And my vision had grown powerfully sharp. I felt strong beyond all imagining. I picked up the corpse and dragged it down and down the winding steps of the tower into the stinking dungeon and threw it to rot with the rest there. Chapter 8. It was time to go. Time to test my powers. I filled my purse and my pockets with as much money as they would comfortably hold, and I buckled on a jeweled sword that was not too old-fashioned, and then went down, locking the iron gate to the tower behind me. The tower was obviously all that remained of a ruined house, but I picked up the scent of the horses in the wind. Strong, very nice smell, perhaps the way an animal would pick up the scent, and I made my way silently around the back to a makeshift stable. It contained not only a handsome old carriage, but 4 magnificent black mares. Perfectly wonderful that they weren't afraid of me. I kissed their smooth flanks and their long, soft noses. In fact, I was so in love with them, I could have spent hours just learning all I could of them through my new senses. But I was eager for other things. There was a human in the stable also, and I'd caught his scent too as soon as I entered. But he was sound asleep, and when I roused him, I saw he was a dull-witted boy who posed no danger to me. "I'm your master now," I said, as I gave him a gold coin, "but I won't be needing you tonight, except to saddle a horse for me." He understood well enough to tell me there was no saddle in the stable before he fell back to dozing. All right. I cut the long carriage reins from one of the bridles, put it on the most beautiful of the mares myself, and rode out bareback. I can't tell you what it was like, the burst of the horse under me, the chilling wind, and the high arch of the night sky. My body was melded to the animal. I was flying over the snow, laughing aloud and now and then singing. I hit high notes I had never reached before, then plunged into a lustrous baritone. Sometimes I was simply crying out in something like joy. It had to be joy. But how could a monster feel joy? I wanted to ride to Paris, of course, but I knew I wasn't ready. There was too much I didn't know about my powers yet, and so I rode in the opposite direction until I came to the outskirts of a small village. There were no humans about, and as I approached the little church, I felt a human rage and impulsiveness breaking through my strange, translucent happiness. I dismounted quickly and tried the excuse me, please. I dismounted quickly and tried the sacristy. Oh my God! Please excuse me. I can't pronounce this word to save my life. I dismounted quickly and tried the sacristy? Yeah, sacristy door. My apologies. I cannot pronounce this word to save my life. Its lock gave, and I walked through the nave to the communion rail. I don't know what I felt at this moment. Maybe I wanted something to happen. I felt murderous, and lightning did not strike. I stared at the red glare of the vigil lights on the altar. I looked up at the figures frozen in the illuminated blackness of the stained glass. And in desperation, I went up over the communion rail and put my hands on the tabernacle itself. I broke open its tiny little doors, and I reached in and took out the jeweled ciborium with its consecrated hosts. No, there was no power here. Nothing that I could feel or see or know with any of my monstrous senses. Nothing that responded to me. There were wafers and gold and wax and light. I bowed my head on the altar. I must have looked like the priest in the middle of Mass. Then I shut up everything in the tabernacle again. I closed it all up just fine, so nobody would know a sacrilege had been committed. And then I made my way down one side of the church and up the other, the lurid paintings and statues captivating me. I realized I was seeing the process of the sculptor and the painter, not merely the creative miracle. I was seeing the way the lacquer caught the light. I was seeing little mistakes in perspective, flashes of unexpected expressiveness. What will the great masters be to my eyes? I was thinking. I found myself staring at the simplest designs painted in the plaster walls. Then I knelt down to look at the patterns in the marble until I realized I was stretched out, staring wide-eyed at the floor under my nose. This is getting out of hand, surely. I got up, shivering a little and crying a little, and looking at the candles as if they were alive and getting very sick of this. Time to get out of this place and go into the village. For 2 hours I was in the village, and for most of that time I was not seen or heard by anyone. I found it absurdly easy to jump over the garden walls, to spring from the earth to low rooftops. I could leap from a height of 3 stories to the ground, and climb the side of a building, digging my nails and my toes into the mortar between the stones. I peered in windows. I saw couples asleep in their ruffled beds, infants dozing in cradles, old women sewing by feeble light. My apologies. And the houses looked like dollhouses to me in their completeness. Perfect collections of toys with their dainty little wooden chairs and polished mantelpieces, mended curtains and well-scrubbed floors. I saw all this as one who had never been part of life, gazing lovingly at the simplest details. A starched white apron on its hook, worn boots on the hearth, a pitcher beside a bed. And the people. Oh, the people were marvels. Of course I picked up their scent, but I was satisfied, and it didn't make me miserable. Rather, I doted upon their pink skin and delicate limbs, the precision with which they moved, the whole process of their lives, as if I had never been one of them at all. That they had 5 fingers on each hand seemed remarkable. They yawned, cried, shifted in sleep. I was entranced with them. And when they spoke, the thickest walls could not prevent me from hearing their words. But the most beguiling aspect of my explorations was that I heard the thoughts of these people, just as I had heard the evil servant whom I killed. Unhappiness, misery, expectation. These were currents in the air, some weak, some frighteningly strong, some no more than a glimmer, gone before I knew the source. But I could not, strictly speaking, read minds. Most trivial thought was veiled from me, and when I lapsed into my own considerations, even the strongest passions did not intrude. In some, it was intense feeling that carried thought to me, and only when I wished to receive it. And there were some minds that even in the heat of anger gave me nothing. These discoveries jolted me and almost bruised me, as did the common beauty everywhere I looked, the splendor in the ordinary. But I knew perfectly well there was an abyss behind it, into which I might quite suddenly and helplessly drop. After all, I wasn't one of these warm and pulsing miracles of complication and innocence. They were my victims. Time to leave the village. I'd learned enough here, but just before I left, I performed one final act of daring. I couldn't help myself. I just had to do it. Pulling up the high collar of my red cloak, I went into the inn, sought a corner away from the fire, and ordered a glass of wine. Everyone in the little place gave me the eye, but not because they knew there was a supernatural being in their midst. They were merely glancing at the richly dressed gentleman. And for 20 minutes I remained, testing it even further. No one, not even the man who served me, detected anything. Of course I didn't touch the wine. One whiff of it, and I knew that my body could not abide it. But the point was, I could fool mortals. I could move among them. I was jubilant when I left the inn. As soon as I reached the woods, I started to run. And then I was running so fast that the sky and the trees had become a blur. I was almost flying. Then I stopped, leapt, danced about. I gathered up stones and threw them so far I could not see them land. And when I saw a fallen tree limb, thick and full of sap, I picked it up and broke it over my knee as if it were a twig. I shouted, then sang at the top of my lungs again. I collapsed on the grass, laughing. And then I rose, tore off my cloak and my sword, and commenced to turn cartwheels. I turned cartwheels just like the acrobats at Renaud's, and then I somersaulted perfectly. I did it again, and this time backwards, and then forwards. And then I turned double somersaults and triple somersaults, and leapt straight up in the air some 15 feet off the ground before landing squarely on my feet. Somewhat out of breath, and wanting to do these tricks some more. But the morning was coming. Only the subtlest change in the air, the sky, but I knew it as if hell's bells were ringing. Hell's bells calling the vampire home to the sleep of death. Ah, the melting loveliness of the sky, the loveliness of the vision of dim belfries. And an odd thought came to me, that in hell the light of the fires would be so bright it would be like sunlight. And this would be the only sunlight I would never see again. But what have I done? I thought. I didn't ask for this. I didn't give in. Even when Magnus told me I was dying, I fought him, and yet I am hearing hell's bells now. Well, who gives a damn? When I reached the churchyard, quite ready for the rich home, something distracted me. I stood holding the rein of my horse, and looking at the small field of graves, and could not quite figure what it was. Then it came again, and I knew. I felt a distinct presence in the churchyard. I stood so still I heard the blood thundering in my veins. It wasn't human, this presence. It had no scent, and there were no human thoughts coming from it. Rather, it seemed veiled and defended, and it knew I was here. It was watching me. Could I be imagining this? I stood listening, looking. A scattering of grey tombstones poked through the snow, and far away stood a row of old crypts, larger, ornamented, but just as ruined as the stones. It seemed the presence lingered somewhere near the crypts, and then I felt it distinctly as it moved towards the enclosing trees. "Who are you?" I demanded. I heard my voice like a knife. "Answer me!" I called out even louder. I felt a great tumult in it, this presence, and I was certain that it was moving away very rapidly. I dashed across the churchyard after it, and I could feel it receding. Yet I saw nothing in the barren forest, and I realized I was stronger than it, and that it had been afraid of me. Well, fancy that. Afraid of me. And I had no idea whether or not it was corporeal, vampire the same as I was, or something without a body. "Well, one thing is for sure," I said. "You're a coward!" Tingling in the air, the forest seemed to breathe for an instant. A sense of my own might came over me that had been brewing all along. I was in fear of nothing. Not the church, not the dark, not the worms swarming over the corpses in my dungeon. Not even this strange, eerie force that had retreated into the forest. And seemed to be near at hand again. Not even of men. I was an extraordinary fiend. If I'd been sitting on the steps of hell with my elbows on my knees and the devil had said, "Lestat, come, choose the form of the fiend you wish to be to roam the earth," how could I have chosen a better fiend than what I was? And it seemed suddenly that suffering was an idea I'd known in another existence and would never know again. I can't help but laugh now when I think of that first night, especially of that particular moment. Chapter 9. The next night I went tearing into Paris with as much gold as I could carry. The sun had just sunk beneath the horizon when I opened my eyes, and a clear azure light still emanated from the sky as I mounted and rode off to the city. I was starving, and as luck would have it, I was attacked by a cutthroat before I ever reached the city walls. He came thundering out of the woods, pistol blazing, and I actually saw the ball leave the barrel of the gun and go past me as I left off my horse and went at him. He was a powerful man, and I was astonished at how much I enjoyed his cursing and struggling. The vicious servant I'd taken last night had been old. This was a hard young body. Even the roughness of his badly shaven beard tantalized me, and I loved the strength in his hands as he struck at me. But it was no sport. He froze as I sank my teeth into the artery, and when the blood came it was pure voluptuousness. In fact, it was so exquisite that I forgot completely about drawing away before the heart stopped. We were on our knees in the snow together, and it was a wallop, the life going into me with the blood. I couldn't move for a long moment. Broke the rules already, I thought. Am I supposed to die now? Doesn't look like that it's going to happen. Just this rolling delirium. And the poor dead bastard in my arms, who would have blown my face off with his pistol if I had let him. I kept staring at the darkening sky, at the great spangled mass of shadows ahead that was Paris. And there was only this warmth after, and obviously increasing strength. So far, so good. I climbed to my feet and wiped my lips. Then I pitched the body as far as I could across the unbroken snow. I was more powerful than ever. And for a little while I stood there, feeling gluttonous and murderous, just wanting to kill again, so that this ecstasy would go on forever. But I couldn't have drunk any more blood, and gradually I grew calm and changed somewhat. A desolate feeling came over me, an aloneness, as though the thief had been a friend to me, or kin to me, and had deserted me. I couldn't understand it, except that the drinking had been so intimate. His scent was on me now, and I sort of liked it. But there he lay, yards away on the crumpled crust of the snow, hands and face looking gray under the rising moon. Hell, the son of a bitch was going to kill me, wasn't he? Within an hour, I had found a capable attorney, name of Pierre Roget, at his home in the Marais. An ambitious young man with a mind that was completely open to me. Greedy, clever, conscientious. Exactly what I wanted. Not only could I read his thoughts when he wasn't talking, but he believed everything I told him. He was most eager to be of service to the husband of an heiress from Saint-Domingue. I believe that's how you say it. Please don't crucify me. And certainly he would put out all the candles, save one, if my eyes were still hurting from tropical fever. As for my fortune in gems, he dealt with the most reputable jewelers, bank accounts and letters of exchange for my family in the Auvergne. Yes, immediately. This was easier than playing Lelio. But I was having a hell of a time concentrating. Everything was distraction. The smoky flame of the candle on the brass inkstand, the gilded pattern of the Chinese wallpaper, and Monsieur Roget's amazing little face, with its eyes glistening behind tiny octagonal spectacles. His teeth kept making me think of clavier keys. Ordinary objects in the room appeared to dance. A chest stared at me with its brass knobs for eyes, and a woman singing in an upstairs room over the low rumble of a stove seemed to be saying something in a low and vibrant secret language, such as "come to me," such as "come to me." But it was going to be this way forever, apparently, and I had to get myself in hand. Money must be sent by courier this very night to my father and my brothers, and to Nicolas de l'Enfant, a musician with Renaud's house of Thespians, who was to be told only that the wealth had come from his friend Lestat de Liancourt. It was Lestat de Liancourt's wish that Nicolas de l'Enfant moved at once to a decent flat on the Isle Saint-Louis, or some other proper place, and Roget should, of course, assist in this, and thereafter Nicolas de l'Enfant should study the violin. Roget should buy for Nicolas de l'Enfant the best available violin, a Stradivarius. And finally, a separate letter was to be written to my mother, the Marquis Gabrielle de Liancourt, in Italian, so that no one else could read it, and a special purse was to be sent to her. If she could undertake a journey to southern Italy, the place where she'd been born, maybe she could stop the course of her consumption. It made me positively dizzy to think of her with the freedom to escape. I wondered what she would think about it. For a long moment I didn't hear anything Roget said. I was picturing her dressed, for once in her life, as the Marquise she was, and riding out of the gates of our castle in her own coach and six. And then I remembered her ravaged face and heard the cough in her lungs as if she were here with me. "Send the letter and the money to her tonight," I said. "I don't care what it costs. Do it." I laid down enough gold to keep her in comfort for a lifetime, if she had a lifetime. "Now," I said, "do you know of a merchant who deals in fine furnishings, paintings, tapestries, someone who might open his shops and storehouses to us this very evening?" "Of course, monsieur. Allow me to get my coat. We shall go immediately." We were headed for the Faubourg Saint-Denis within minutes, and for hours after that I roamed with my mortal attendants through a paradise of material wealth, claiming everything that I wanted. Couches and chairs, china and silver plate, drapery and statuary. All things were mine for the taking, and in my mind I transformed the castle where I had grown up as more and more goods were carried out to be crated and shipped south immediately. To my little nieces and nephews I sent toys of which they'd never dreamed, tiny ships with real sails, doll houses of unbelievable craft and perfection. I learned from each thing that I touched, and there were moments when all the color and texture became too lustrous, too overpowering. I wept inwardly. But I would have got away with playing human to the hilt during this time, except for one very unfortunate mishap. At one point, as we wandered through the warehouse, a rat appeared, as bold city rats will, racing along the wall very close to us. I stared at it. Nothing unusual, of course. But there amid plaster and hardwood and embroidered cloth, the rat looked marvelously particular. And the men, misunderstanding, of course, began mumbling frantic apologies for the rat and stamping their feet to drive it away from us. To me, their voices became a mixture of sounds like stew bubbling in a pot. All I could think was that the rat had very tiny feet, and that I had not yet examined a rat, nor any small, warm-blooded creature. I went and caught the rat, rather too easily, I think, and looked at its feet. I wanted to see what kind of little toenails it had, and what was the flesh like between its little toes, and I forgot the men entirely. It was their sudden silence that brought me back to myself. They were both staring dumbfounded at me. I smiled at them as innocently as I could, let the rat go, and went back to purchasing. Well, they never said anything about it, but there was a lesson in this. I had really frightened them. Later that night, I gave my lawyer one last commission. He must send a present of 100 crowns to a theater owner by the name of Renaud, with a note of thanks from me for his kindness. "Find out the situation with this little playhouse," I said. "Find out if there are any debts against it." Of course, I'd never go near the theater. They must never guess what had happened, never be contaminated by it. And for now I had done what I could for all those I loved, hadn't I? And when all this was finished, when the church clock struck 3 over the white rooftops, and I was hungry enough to smell blood everywhere that I turned, I found myself standing in the empty Boulevard du Temple. The dirty snow had turned to slush under the carriage wheels, and I was looking up the House of Thespians with its spattered walls and its torn playbills and the name of the young mortal actor, Lestat de Voilà, or de Voilà, I'll say it like that, still written there in red letters. Pardon me a minute, I need to get a bit of water.
Just give me 1 second. 1 second.
Oh, God, I love ice water. So much. Really? They're all still there? Okay. Let me actually check the background music. I can keep going with it. I'll find extra music. Let's try this one. That should work. That'll work well. Oh, my eyes are... Oof. I spent too long reading. Right. Still got an hour to go. Yeah, I'll keep going. Chapter 10. The following nights were a rampage. I began to drink up Paris as if the city were blood. In the early evening, I raided the worst sections, tangling with thieves and killers, often giving them a playful chance to defend themselves, then snarling them in a fatal embrace and feasting to the point of gluttony. I savored different types of kills: big, lumbering creatures, small, wiry ones, the hirsute and the dark-skinned. But my favorite was the very young scoundrel who'd kill you for the coins in your pocket. I loved their grunting and cursing. Sometimes I held them with one hand and laughed at them till they were in a positive fury, and I threw their knives over the rooftops and smashed their pistols to pieces against the walls. But in all this, my full strength was like a cat never allowed to spring. And the one thing I loathed in them was fear. If a victim was really afraid, I usually lost interest. As time went on, I learned to postpone the kill. I drank a little from one and more from another, and then took the grand wallop of the death itself from the third or the fourth one. It was the chase and the struggle that I was multiplying for my own pleasure. And when I'd had enough of all this hunting and drinking in an evening to content some 6 healthy vampires, I turned my eyes to the rest of Paris. All the glorious pastimes I couldn't afford before. But not before going to Rogette's house for news of Nicholas or my mother. Her letters were brimming with happiness at my good fortune, and she promised to go to Italy in the spring if only she could get the strength to do it. Right now, she wanted books from Paris, of course, and newspapers and keyboard music for the harpsichord I'd sent. And she had to know, was I truly happy? Had I fulfilled my dreams? She was leery of wealth. I had been so happy at Renaud's. I must confide in her. It was agony to hear these words read to me. Time to become a liar in earnest, which I had never been. But for her, I would do it. As for Nicky, I should have known he wouldn't settle for gifts and vague tales, that he would demand to see me and keep on demanding it. He was frightening Rogette a little bit, but it didn't do any good. There was nothing the attorney could tell him except what I've explained, and I was so wary of seeing Nicky that I didn't even ask for the location of the house into which he'd moved. I told the lawyer to make certain he studied with his Italian maestro, and that he had everything he could possibly desire. But I did manage somehow to hear, quite against my will, that Nicholas hadn't quit the theater. He was still playing at Renaud's House of Thespians. Now this maddened me. Why the hell, I thought, should he do that? Because he loved it there, the same as I had. That was why. Did anybody really have to tell me this? We had all been kindred in that little rat-trap playhouse. Don't think about the moment when the curtain goes up, when the audience begins to clap and shout. No. Send cases of wine and champagne to the theater. Send flowers for Jeanette and Luciana, the girls I had fought with the most and most the girls I had fought with the most and most loved, and more gifts of gold for Renaud. Pay off the debts he had. But as the nights passed and these gifts were dispatched, Renaud became embarrassed about all this. A fortnight later, Rogette told me Renaud had made a proposal. He wanted me to buy the House of Thespians and keep him on as manager with enough capital to stage larger and more wondrous spectacles than he had ever before attempted. With my money and his cleverness, we could make the house the talk of Paris. I didn't answer right away. It took me more than a moment to realize that I could own the theater just like that. Own it like the gems in the chest, or the clothes I wore, or the dollhouse I'd sent to my nieces. I said no, and went out slamming the door. Then I came right back. All right, buy the theater, I said, and give him 10,000 crowns to do whatever he wants. This was a fortune. and I didn't even know why I had done this. This pain will pass, I thought. It has to. And I must gain some control over my thoughts, realize that these things cannot affect me. After all, where did I spend my time now? At the grandest theaters in Paris. I had the finest seats for the ballet and the opera, for the dramas of Molière and Racine. I was hanging about before the footlights, gazing up at the great actors and actresses. I had suits made in every color of the rainbow, jewels on my fingers, wigs in the latest fashions, shoes with diamond buckles as well as gold heels. And I had eternity to be drunk on the poetry I was hearing, drunk on the singing and the sweep of the dancers' arms, drunk on the organ throbbing in the great cavern of Notre Dame, and drunk on the chimes that counted out the hours to me, drunk on the snow falling soundlessly on the empty gardens of the Tuileries. And each night I was becoming less wary among mortals, more at ease with them. Not even a month had passed before I got up the courage to plunge right into a crowded ball at the Palais Royal. I was warm and ruddy from the kill, and at once I joined the dance. I didn't arouse the slightest suspicion. Rather, the women seemed drawn to me, and I loved the touch of their hot fingers and the soft crush of their arms and their breasts. After that, I bore right into the early evening crowds in the boulevards, rushing past Renaud's. I squeezed into the other houses to see the puppet shows, the mimes, and the acrobats. I didn't flee from street lamps any more. I went into cafes and bought coffee just to feel the warmth of it against my fingers, and I spoke to men when I chose. I even argued with them about the state of the monarchy, and I went madly into mastering billiards and card games, and it seemed to me I might go right into the house of thespians if I wanted to, buy a ticket, and slip up into the balcony and see what was going on. See Nicholas! Well, I didn't do that. What was I dreaming of, to go near to Nicky? It was one thing to fool strangers, men and women, who'd never known me, but what would Nicholas see if he looked into my eyes? What would he see when he looked at my skin? Besides, I had too much to do, I told myself. I was learning more and more about my nature and my powers. My hair, for example, was lighter, yet thicker, and grew not at all, nor did my fingernails and toenails, which had a great luster, though if I filed them away, they would regenerate during the day to the length they had been when I died. And though people couldn't discern such secrets on inspections, they sensed other things, an unnatural gleam to my eyes, too many reflected colors in them, and a faint luminescence to my skin. When I was hungry, this luminescence was very marked, all the more reason to feed. And I was learning that I could put people in thrall if I stared at them too hard, and my voice required very strict modulation. I might speak too low for mortal hearing, and were I to shout or laugh too loud, I could shatter another's ears. I could hurt my own ears. There were other difficulties. My movements. I tended to walk, to run, to dance, and to smile and gesture like a human being, but if surprised, horrified, grieved, my body could bend and contort like that of an acrobat. Even my facial expressions could be wildly exaggerated. Once, forgetting myself as I walked in the Boulevard du Temple, thinking of Nicholas naturally, I sat down beneath a tree, drew up my knees, and put my hands to the side of my head like a stricken elf in a fairy tale. 18th century gentlemen in eighteenth century gentlemen in brocade frock coats and white silk stockings didn't do things like that, at least not on the street. At another time, while deep in contemplation of the changing of the light on surfaces, I hopped up and sat with my legs crossed on the top of a carriage, with my elbows on my knees. Well, this startled people. It frightened them. But more often than not, even when frightened by the whiteness of my skin, they merely looked away. They deceived themselves. I quickly realized that everything was explainable. It was the rational 18th century habit of mind. After all, there hadn't been a case of witchcraft in 100 years, the last that I knew of being the trial of La Voisin, a fortune-teller burnt alive in the time of Louis the Sun King. And this was Paris. So if I accidentally crushed crystal glasses when I lifted them, or slammed doors back into the walls when opening them, people assumed I was drunk. But now and then I answered questions before mortals had asked them of me. I fell into stuporous states just looking at candles or tree branches, and didn't move for so long that people asked if I was ill. And my worst problem was laughter. I would go into fits of laughter, and I couldn't stop. Anything could set me off. The sheer madness of my own position might set me off. This can still happen to me fairly easily. No loss, no pain, no deepening understanding of my predicament changes it. Something strikes me as funny. I begin to laugh, and I can't stop. It makes other vampires furious, by the way. But I jump ahead of the tale. As you have probably noticed, I have made no mention of other vampires. The fact was, I could not find any. I could find no other supernatural being in all of Paris. Mortals to the left of me, mortals to the right of me, and now and then, just when I'd convinced myself it wasn't happening at all, I'd feel that vague and maddeningly elusive presence. It was never any more substantial than it had been the first night in the village churchyard, and invariably, it was in the vicinity of a Paris cemetery. Always I'd stop, turn, and try to draw it out, but it was never any good. The thing was gone before I could be certain of it. I could never find it on my own, and the stench of city cemeteries was so revolting I couldn't go into them. This was coming to say more than fastidiousness or bad memories of my own dungeon beneath the tower. Revulsion at the sight or smell of death seemed part of my nature. I couldn't watch executions any more than I was that trembling boy from the auberge, and corpses made me cover my face. I think I was offended by death unless I was the cause of it, and I had to get clean away from any dead victims almost immediately. But to return to the matter of the presence, I came to wonder if it wasn't some other species of haunt, something that couldn't commune with me. On the other hand, I had the distinct impression that the presence was watching me, maybe even deliberately revealing itself to me. Whatever the case, I saw no other vampires in Paris, and I was beginning to wonder if there could be more than any one of us at a given time. Maybe Magnus destroyed the vampire from whom he stole the blood. Maybe he had to perish once he passed on his powers, and I too would die if I were to make another vampire. But no, that didn't make sense. Magnus had had great strength even after giving me his blood, and he had bound his vampire victim in chains when he stole his powers. An enormous mystery, and a maddening one, but for the moment ignorance was truly bliss, and I was doing very well, discovering things without the help of Magnus. And maybe this was what Magnus had intended. Maybe this had been his way of learning centuries ago. I remembered his words, that in the secret chamber of the tower I would find all that I needed to prosper. Hello? Welcome. You're a bit quiet on my end. Hold on a second. Oh shit, I didn't start the event! I'm a fucking goofy ass. What's wrong with me? Yes. But we just reached chapter 11 of part 2. Lestat has tested out his powers. He's basically take those fortunes and gems and gold and shit that he found in the cave where his coffin is, and basically is just going ham on it, sending money back to his mother, buying the theater that he was working with, checking up on Nicholas, even though he doesn't really want to meet him just yet. Just yet. I also have a little bit of ambience music. I might turn that down just a smidge. Still want to hear it. Okay. But I'm going to go for at least another hour before I move on to Borderlands 2, if that's what you and Smokes wanted to do. I don't mind. What's that? What happened?
I cannot do Borderlands.
Oh! Oh, shit. Okay, well, that's unfortunate. But at least we're here. At least we're here for this. So that's still a good thing. We're about, I want to say maybe a quarter of the way into the book at this point. which is surprising to me. Which is surprising to me. Okay. Okay. One night in March, I realized as Rogette read my mother's letter to me that I could read as well. Actually, wait. Oh, wait, no. I think I skipped a bit. Hold on. My mistake. Oh my god. Okay, here it is. An amorous mystery, and a maddening one. But for the moment, ignorance was truly bliss, and I was doing very well discovering things without the help of Magnus. And maybe this was what Magnus had intended. Maybe this had been his way of learning centuries ago. I remembered his words, that in the secret chamber of the tower, I would find all that I needed to prosper. The hours flew as I roamed the city, and only to conceal myself in the tower by day did I ever deliberately leave the company of human beings. Yet I was beginning to wonder, if you can dance with them and play billiards with them and talk with them, then why can't you dwell among them, just the way you did when you were living? Why couldn't you pass for one of them, and enter again into the very fabric of life where there is... What? Say it! And here it was nearly spring, and the nights were getting warmer, and the house of Thesbians was putting on a new drama, with new acrobats between the acts, and the trees were in bloom again, and every waking moment I thought of Nicky. One night in March, I realized as Rogette read my mother's letter to me that I could read as well as he could. I had learned from 1,000 sources how to read without even trying. I took the letter home with me. Even the inner chamber was no longer really cold, and I sat by the window reading my mother's words for the first time in private. I could almost hear her voice speaking to me. Nicholas writes that you have purchased Renaud's, so you own the little theater on the boulevard where you were so happy. But do you possess the happiness still? When will you answer me? I folded up the letter and put it in my pocket. The blood tears were coming into my eyes. Why must she understand so much, yet so little? Chapter 11. The wind had lost its sting. All the smells of the city were coming back, and the markets were full of flowers. I dashed to Rogette's house without even thinking of what I was doing, and demanded that he tell me where Nicholas lived. I would just have to look at him, make certain he was in good health, be certain the house was fine enough. It was on the Ile St. Louis, and very impressive, just as I'd wanted, but the windows were all shuttered along the I think it's quays? Case? I think it's case. I can't quite spell it. Anyways, I stood watching it for a long time, as one carriage after another roared over the nearby bridge, and I knew that I had to see Nicky. I started to climb the wall, just as I had climbed walls in the village, and I found it amazingly easy. One story after another I climbed, much higher than I had ever dared to climb in the past. And then I sped over the roof, and down the inside of the courtyard to look for Nicky's flat. I passed a handful of open windows before I came to the right one, and there was Nicholas in the glare of the supper table, and Jeanette and Lucina were with him. And they were having the late night meal that we used to take together when the theater closed. At the first sight of him, I drew back away from the casement and closed my eyes. I might have fallen if my right hand hadn't held fast to the wall, as if with a will of its own. I had seen the room for only an instant, but every detail was fixed in my mind. He was dressed in old green velvet, finery he'd worn so casually in the crooked streets at home. But everywhere around him were signs of the wealth I'd sent him, leather-bound books on the shelves, and an inlaid desk with an oval painting above it, and the Italian violin gleaming atop the new pianoforte. He wore a jeweled ring I'd sent, and his brown hair was tied back with a black silk ribbon. And he sat brooding with his elbows on the table, eating nothing from the expensive china plate before him. Carefully I opened my eyes and looked at him again, and his natural gifts were there in a blaze of light. The delicate but strong limbs, large sober brown eyes, and his mouth that for all the irony and sarcasm that could come out of it was childlike and ready to be kissed. There seemed in him a frailty I'd never perceived or understood, Yet he looked infinitely intelligent, my Nicky, full of tangled, uncompromising thoughts as he listened to Jeanette, who was talking rapidly. "Lestat's married," she said as Lucina nodded. "The wife's rich, and he can't let her know he was a common actor. It's simple enough." "I say we let him in peace," Lucina said. "He saved the theater from closing, and he showers us with gifts." "I don't believe it," Nicholas said bitterly. "He wouldn't be ashamed of us." There was a suppressed rage in his voice, an ugly grief. "And why did he leave the way he did? I heard him calling me. The window was smashed to pieces. I tell you, I was half awake and I heard his voice." An uneasy silence fell among them. They didn't believe his account of things, how I'd vanished from the garret, and telling it again would only isolate him and embitter him further. I could sense this from all their thoughts. "You didn't really know Lestat," he said now, almost in a surly fashion, returning to the manageable conversation that other mortals would allow him. "Lestat would spit in the face of anyone who would be ashamed of us. He sends me money. What am I supposed to do with it? He plays games with us." No answer from the others, the solid, practical beings who would not speak against the mysterious benefactor. Things were going too well, and in the lengthening silence I felt the depth of Nicky's anguish. I knew it as if I were peering into his skull. And I couldn't bear it. I couldn't bear delving into his soul without his knowing it. Yet I couldn't stop myself from sensing a vast secret terrain inside him. Grimmer, perhaps, than I had ever dreamed, and his words came back to me that the darkness in him was like the darkness I'd seen at the inn, and that he tried to conceal it from me. I could almost see it, this terrain, and in a real way it was beyond his mind, as if his mind were merely a portal to a chaos stretching out before the borders of all we know. Too frightening, man. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to feel what he felt. But what could I do for him? That was the important thing. What could I do to stop this torment once and for all? Yet I wanted so to touch him, his hands, his arms, his face. I wanted to feel his flesh with these new immortal fingers, and I found myself whispering the word, alive. Yes, you are alive, and that means you can die. And everything I see when I look at you is utterly insubstantial. It is a commingling of tiny movements and indefinable colors, as if you haven't a body at all, but are a collection of heat and light. You are light itself, and what am I now? Eternal as I am, I curl like a cinder in that blaze. But the atmosphere of the room had changed. Lucina and Jeanette were taking their leave with polite words. He was ignoring them. He had turned to the window, and he was rising as if he had been called by a secret voice. The look on his face was indescribable. He knew I was there. Instantly, I shot up the slippery wall to the roof, but I could still hear him below. I looked down, and I saw his naked hands on the window ledge, and through the silence I heard his panic. He'd sensed that I was there. My presence, mind you. That is what he sensed, just as I sensed the presence in the graveyards. But how, he argued with himself, could Lestat have been here? I was too shocked to do anything. I clung to the roof gutter, and I could feel the departure of the others, feel that he was now alone. And all I could think was, what in the name of hell is this presence that he felt? I mean, I wasn't Lestat anymore. I was this demon, this powerful and greedy vampire, and yet he felt my presence, the presence of Lestat, the young man he knew. It was a very different thing from a mortal seeing my face and blurting out my name in confusion. He had recognized it. He recognized in my monster self something that he knew and loved. I stopped listening to him. I merely lay on the roof. But I knew he was moving below. I knew it when he lifted the violin from its place on the pianoforte. Or pianoforte, I can't quite remember how you pronounce it, but anyways. And I knew he was again at the window. And I put my hands over my ears. Still the sound came. It came rising out of the instrument and cleaving the night, as if it were some shining element, other than air and light and matter, that might climb to the very stars. He bore down on the strings, and I can almost see him against my eyelids, swaying back and forth, his head bowed against the violin as if he meant to pass into the music. And then all sense of him vanished, and there was only the sound, the long, vibrant notes and the chilling glissandos, and the violin singing in its own tongue to make every other form of speech seem false. Yet as the song deepened, it became the very essence of despair, as if its beauty were a horrid coincidence, grotesquerie without a particle of truth. Was this what he believed? What he had always believed when I talked on and on about goodness? Was he making the violin say it? Was he deliberately creating those long, pure liquid notes to say that beauty meant nothing because it came from the despair inside him? And it had nothing to do with the despair, finally, because the despair wasn't beautiful, and beauty, then, was a horrid irony. I didn't know the answer, but the sound went beyond him as it always had. It grew bigger than the despair. It fell effortlessly into a slow melody, like water seeking its own downward mountain path. It grew richer and darker still, and there seemed something undisciplined and chastening in it, and heartbreaking and vast. I lay on my back on the roof now, with my eyes on the stars. Pinpoints of light mortals could not have seen. Phantom clouds and the raw, piercing sound of the violin coming slowly with exquisite tension to a close. I didn't move. I was in some silent understanding of the language the violin spoke to me. Nikki, if we could talk again. If our conversation could only continue. I was in... excuse me, hold on. Beauty wasn't the treachery he imagined it to be. Rather, it was an uncharted land where one could make 1,000 fatal errors, a wild and indifferent paradise without signposts of evil or good. In spite of all the refinements of civilization that conspired to make art, the dizzying perfection of the string quartet, or the sprawling grandeur of Fragonard's canvases, beauty was savage. It was as dangerous and lawless as the earth had been eons before man and one single coherent thought in his head, or wrote codes of conduct on tablets of clay. Beauty was a savage garden. So why must it wound him that the most despairing music is full of beauty? Why must it hurt him and make him cynical and sad and untrusting? Good and evil, those are concepts man has made, and man is better, really, than the savage garden. But maybe deep inside Nikki had always dreamed of a harmony among all things that I had always known was impossible. Nikki had dreamed not of goodness, but of justice. But we could never discuss these things now with each other. We could never again be in the inn. Forgive me, Nikki. Good and evil exist still, as they always will, but our conversation is over forever. Yet even as I left the roof, as I stole silently away from the Ile St. Louis, I knew what I meant to do. I didn't admit it to myself, but I knew. The next night, it was already late when I reached the Boulevard du Temple. I'd fed well in the Ile de la Cité, and the first act at Renaud's House of Thespians was already underway. Okay, hold on, I need a second. I'm getting a bit lightheaded reading for this damn long. Give me a minute. I need a bit more. Say that again?
How the heck are you getting lightheaded?
Mainly it's just control of my breath and speaking for long stretches of breath, like holding it, and also just keeping my eyes focused on a book for like more than half an hour can fuck with your eyes when you don't adjust them properly. Like, it's not anything serious. Like, this can happen to anybody. But, yeah, it just happens.
Okay.
It's nothing really weird. It's just if you read for a long time and your vision doesn't adjust for things outside of the focus of your book, it kind of fucks with you a little. But, like, for, like, less than, like, a minute. It's a little quirk about it. But most people don't read nowadays, so they wouldn't fucking know what that is.
Well,
Sadly.
I tend to read at night.
I guess I just read intensely. I don't know. I have no idea. I couldn't tell you. Okay. Right. We still got a little while to go. I might try to go for the next maybe couple chapters, and I might call it early because I want to do something with you and the other guys, even if it's not Borderlands. I'd like to do something. Maybe Deep Rock Galactic. Do you have that?
I'm gonna have to install it.
Okay. Okay. Because I'd actually love to play a game of that with you guys.
Try Borderlands the third one.
I don't have Borderlands 3. I'm sorry. What other games? I could try a thing of Team Fortress 2.
Yeah.
Sure. Fuck it, why not? I'd never played Team Fortress 2 with anybody, so that will be new.
Man versus machine.
I usually play... Actually, no, I haven't really played much of Man vs. Machine. I'm not used to it. I'll have to try it. But I at least want to get one thing of payload. I want to do at least one payload map. I love payload. Yeah. Alright. Okay, let's go for at least the next couple chapters at least. Let's get those out of the way. Okay, chapter 12. I dressed as if I were going to court. In silver brocade with a lavender velvet roquelaire. I'm sorry, I'm horrible at pronouncing French. Over my shoulders. I had a new sword with a deep carved silver handle, and the usual heavy ornate buckles on my shoes, the usual lace, gloves, tricorn, and I came to the theater in a huge carriage. But as soon as I paid the driver, I went back the alley and opened the stage door exactly as I used to do. At once the old atmosphere surrounded me, the smell of the thick grease paint and the cheap costumes full of sweat and perfume, and the dust. I could see a fragment of the lighted stage burning beyond the helter-skelter of hulking props, and hear bursts of laughter from the hall. A group of acrobats waited to go on at the intermezzo, a crowd of jesters in red tights, caps, and dagged collars studded with little gold bells. I felt dizzy, and for a moment afraid. The place felt close and dangerous over my head, and yet it was wonderful to be inside it again, and a sadness was swelling inside me. No, a panic, actually. Lucina saw me, and she let out a shriek. Doors opened everywhere on the cluttered little dressing rooms. Renaud plunged toward me and pumped my hand. Where there had been nothing but wood and drapery a moment before, there was now a little universe of excited human beings, faces full of high color and dampness, and I found myself drawing back from a smoking candelabra with the quick words, "My eyes, put it out. Put out the candles, they hurt his eyes. Can't you see that?" Excuse me, that was a woman's voice. "Put out the candles, they hurt his eyes. Can't you see that?" Jeanette insisted sharply. I felt her wet lips open against my face. Everyone was around me, even the acrobats who didn't know me, and the old scene painters and carpenters who had taught me so many things. Lucina said, "Get Nicky," and I almost cried no. Applause was shaking the little house. The curtain was being pulled closed from either side. At once the old actors were upon me, and Renaud was calling for champagne. I was holding my hands over my eyes, as if like the basilisk I'd kill every one of them if I looked at them. And I could feel tears and knew that before they saw the blood and the tears, I had to wipe the tears away. But they were so close I couldn't get my handkerchief, and with a sudden terrible weakness I put my arms around Jeanette and Lucina, and I pressed my face against Lucina's face. Like birds they were, with bones full of air, and hearts like beating wings, and for 1 second I listened with a vampire's ear to the blood in them, but that seemed an obscenity, and I just gave in to the hugging and the kissing, ignoring the thump of their hearts, and holding them and smelling their powdered skin and feeling again the press of their lips. "You don't know how you worried us." Sorry, again, this is a man. Fuck me. "You don't know how you worried us," Renaud was booming. "And then the stories of your good fortune. Everyone. He was clapping his hands. It's Monsieur de Valois, the owner of this great theatrical establishment." And he said a lot of other pompous and playful things, dragging up the new actors and actresses to kiss my hand, I suppose, or my feet. I was holding tight to the girls as if I'd explode into fragments if I let them go. And then I heard Nicky, and knew he was only a foot away, staring at me, and that he was too glad to see me to be hurt anymore. I didn't open my eyes, but I felt his hand in my face. And then holding tight to the back of my neck, they must have made way for him, and when he came into my arms I felt a little convulsion of terror. But the light was dim here, and I had fed furiously to be warm and human-looking, and I thought desperately, I don't know to whom I pray to make the deception work. And then there was only Nicholas, and I didn't care. I looked up and into his face. How to describe what humans look like to us? I've tried to describe it a little when I spoke of Nicky's beauty the night before as a mixture of movement and color, but you can't imagine what it's like for us to look on living flesh. There are those billions of colors and tiny configurations of movement. Yes, that make up excuse me, let me retry that again. I fucked up the tempo. There are those billions of colors and tiny configurations of movement, yes, that make up a living creature on whom we concentrate. But the radiance mingles totally with the carnal scent. Beautiful, that's what any human being is to us, if we stop to consider it. Even the old and the diseased, the downtrodden that one doesn't really see in the street. They are all like that. Like flowers ever in the process of opening, butterflies ever unfolding out of the cocoon. Well, I saw all this when I saw Nicky, and I smelled the blood pumping in him, and for one heady moment I felt love, and only love, obliterating every recollection of the horrors that had deformed me. Every evil rapture, every new power with its gratification seemed unreal. Maybe I felt a profound joy, too, that I could still love, if I'd ever doubted it, and that a tragic victory had been confirmed. All the mortal comfort intoxicated me, and I could have closed my eyes and slipped from consciousness, carrying him with me, or so it seemed. But something else stirred in me, collecting strength so fast my mind raced to catch up with it, and deny it even as it threatened to grow out of control. And I knew it for what it was. Something that monstrous and enormous and natural to me, as the sun was unnatural. I wanted Nicky. I wanted him as surely as any victim I'd ever struggled with in the Ile de la Cité. I wanted his blood flowing into me, wanted its taste and its smell and its heat. The little place shook with shouts and laughter, Renaud telling the acrobats to get on with the intermezzo, and Lucina opening the champagne. But we were closed off in the embrace. The hard heat of his body made me stiffen and draw back, though it seemed I didn't move at all. And it maddened me. Suddenly that this one whom I loved, even as I loved my mother and my brothers, this one who had drawn from me the only tenderness I'd ever felt, was an unconquerable citadel, holding fast in ignorance against my thirst for blood when so many hundreds of victims had so easily given it up. This was what I'd been made for. This was the path I had been meant to walk. What were those others to me now? The thieves and killers I'd cut down in the wilderness of Paris. This was what I wanted, and the great awesome possibility of Nicky's death exploded in my brain. The darkness against my closed eyelids had become blood red, Nicky's mind emptying in that last moment, giving up its complexity with its life. I couldn't move. I could feel the blood as if it were passing into me, and I let my lips rest against his neck. Every particle in me said, "Take him, spirit him out of this place, and away from it, and feed on him, until what? Until he's dead." I broke loose and pushed away. The crowd around us roared and rattled. Renaud was shouting at the acrobats, who stood staring at these proceedings. The audience outside demanded the intermezzo entertainment with a steady rhythmic clap. The orchestra was fiddling away at the lively ditty that would accompany the acrobats. Bones and flesh poked and pushed at me. A shambles it had become, rank with the smell of those ready for the slaughter. I felt the all-too-human rise of nausea. Nicky seemed to have lost his equilibrium, and when our eyes met, I felt the accusations emanating from him. I felt the misery and, worse, the near despair. I pushed past all of them, past the acrobats with the jingling bells, and I don't know why I went forward to the wings instead of out the side door. I wanted to see the stage. I wanted to see the audience. I wanted to penetrate deeper into something for which I had no name or word. But I was mad in these moments. To say I wanted, or I thought, makes no sense at all. My chest was heaving, and the thirst was like a cat clawing to get out. And as I leaned against the wooden beam beside the curtain, Nicky, hurt and misunderstanding everything, came to me again. I let the thirst rage. I let it tear at my insides. I just clung to the rafter, and I saw in one great recollection all my victims, the scum of Paris scraped up from its gutters, and I knew the madness of the course I'd chosen, and the lie of it, and what I really was. What a sublime idiocy that I had dragged that paltry morality with me, striking down the damned ones only, seeking to be saved in spite of it all. What I had thought I was, a righteous partner to the judges and executioners of Paris who strike down the poor for crimes that the rich commit every day. Strong wine I'd had, in chipped and broken vessels, and now the priest was standing before me at the foot of the altar with the golden chalice in his hands, and the wine inside it was the blood of the Lamb. Nicky was talking rapidly. "Lestat, what is it? Tell me," as if the others couldn't hear us. "Where have you been? What's happened to you? Lestat!" "Get on that stage!" Renaud thundered at the gaping acrobats. They trotted past us into the smoky blaze of the footlamps and went into a chain of somersaults. The orchestra made its instruments into twittering birds, a flash of red harlequin sleeves, bells jingling, taunts from the unruly crowd. "Show us something! Really show us something!" Lucina kissed me, and I stared at her white throat, her milky hands. I could see the veins in Jeanette's face, and the soft cushion of her lower lip, coming ever closer. The champagne, splashed into dozens of little glasses, was being drunk. Some speech was issuing forth from Renaud about our partnership, and how tonight's little farce was but the beginning, and we would soon be the grandest theater on the boulevards. I saw myself decked out for the part of Lelio, and heard the ditty I had sung to Flaminia on bended knee. Before me, little mortals flip-flopped heavily, and the audience was howling as the leader of the acrobats made some vulgar movement with his hind end. Before I have even meant to do it, I had gone out on the stage. I was standing in the very center, feeling the heat of the footlights, the smoke stinging my eyes. I stared at the crowded gallery, the screened boxes, the rows and rows of spectators to the back wall, and I heard myself snarl a command for the acrobat to get away. It seemed the laughter was deafening, and the taunts and shouts that greeted me were spasms and eruptions, and quite plainly behind every face in the house was a grinning skull. I was humming the little ditty I'd sung as Lelio, no more than a fragment of the part, but the one I'd carried in the streets afterwards with me, lovely, lovely Flaminia, and on, the words forming meaningless sounds. Insults were cutting through the din. On with the performance, and "You're handsome enough, now let's see some action." From the gallery, someone threw a half-eaten apple that came thumping just past my feet. I unclasped the violet roquelaire and let it fall. I did the same with the silver sword. The song had become an incoherent humming behind my lips, but mad poetry was pounding in my head. I saw the wilderness of beauty in its savagery, the way I'd seen it in last night when Nicky was playing, and the moral world seemed some desperate dream of rationality that in this lush and fetid jungle had not the slightest chance. It was a vision, and I saw rather than understood, except that I was a part of it, natural as the cat with her exquisite and passionless face digging her claws into the back of the screaming rat. "Handsome enough is the grim reaper," I half uttered, Who can snuff all these brief candles, every fluttering soul sucking the air from this hall? But the words were really beyond my reach. They floated in some stratum, perhaps, where a god existed who understood the colors, patterned on a cobra's skin, and the 8 glorious notes that make up the music erupting out of Nicky's instrument, but never the principle, beyond ugliness or beauty, thou shalt not kill. Hundreds of greasy faces peered back at me from the gloom, shabby wigs and paste jewels and filthy finery, skin like water flowing over crooked bones. A crew of ragged beggars whistled and hooted from the gallery, humpback and one-eye, and stinking underarm crutch, and teeth the color of the skull's teeth you sift from the dirt of the grave. I threw out my arms, I crooked my knee, and I began turning as the acrobats and dancers could turn, round and round on the ball of one foot, effortlessly going faster and faster, until I broke, flipping over backwards into a circle of cartwheels, and then somersaults, imitating everything I had ever seen the players at the fairs perform. Applause came immediately. I was agile as I had been in the village, and the stage was tiny and hampering, and the ceiling seemed to press down on me, and the smoke from the footlights to close me in. The little song to Flaminia came back to me, and I started singing it loudly as I turned and jumped and spun again, and then gazing at the ceiling I willed my body upward as I bent my knees to spring. In an instant I touched the rafters, and I was dropping down gracefully, soundlessly to the boards. Gasps rose from the audience. The little crowd in the wings was stunned. The musicians in the pit, who had been silent all the while, were turning to one another. They could see there was no wire. But I was soaring again to the delight of the audience, this time somersaulting all the way up, beyond the painted arch again, to descend to even slower, finer turns. Shouts and cheers broke out over the clapping, but those backstage were mute. Nicky stood at the very edge, his lips silently shaping my name. It has to be trickery, an illusion. The same avowals came from all directions. People demanded agreement from those around them. Renaud's face shone before me for an instant with gaping mouth and squinting eyes. But I had gone into a dance again, and this time the grace of it no longer mattered to the audience. I could feel it, because the dance became a parody, each gesture broader, longer, slower than a human dancer could have sustained. Someone shouted from the wings, and was told to be still, and little cries burst from the musicians and those in the front rows. People were growing uneasy and whispering to one another, but the rabble in the gallery continued to clap. I dashed suddenly towards the audience, as if I meant to admonish it for its rudeness. Several persons were so startled they rose and tried to escape into the aisles. One of the horn players dropped his instrument and climbed out of the pit. I could see the agitation, even the anger in their faces. What were these illusions? It wasn't amusing them suddenly. They couldn't comprehend the skill of it, and something in my serious manner made them afraid. For one terrible moment I felt their helplessness, and I felt their doom. A great horde of jangling skeletons snarled in flesh and rags. That's what they were, and yet their courage blazed out of them. They shouted at me in their impressible pride. I raised my hands slowly to command their attention, and very loudly and steadily I sang the ditty to Flaminia, my lovely Flaminia, a dull little couplet spilling into another couplet, and I let my voice grow louder and louder until suddenly people were rising and screaming before me. But louder still I sang it until it obliterated every other noise in that intolerable roar I saw them all. And in the intolerable roar I saw them all, hundreds of them, overturning the benches as they stood up, their hands clamped to their sides of their heads. Their mouths were grimaces, toneless screams, pandemonium, shrieks, curses, all stumbling and struggling towards the doors. Curtains were pulled from their fastenings. Men dropped down from the gallery to rush for the street. I stopped the horrid song. I stood watching them in a ringing silence, the weak, sweating bodies straining clumsily in every direction. The wind gusted from the open doorways, and I felt a strange coldness over all my limbs, and it seemed my eyes were made of glass. Without looking, I picked up the sword and put it on again, and hooked my finger into the velvet collar of my crumpled and dusty roquelaire. All these gestures seemed as grotesque as everything else I had done, and it seemed of no import that Nicholas was trying to get loose from two of the actors who held him in fear of his life as he shouted my name. But something out of the chaos caught my attention. It did seem to matter, to be terribly, terribly important, in fact, that there was a figure standing above in one of the open boxes who did not struggle to escape or even move. I turned slowly and looked up at him, daring him, it seemed, to remain there. An old man he was, and his dull gray eyes were boring into me with stubborn outrage, and as I glared at him, I heard myself let out a loud, open-mouthed roar. Out of my soul it seemed to come, this sound. It grew louder and louder until those few left below cowered again with their ears stopped. And even Nicholas, rushing forward, buckled beneath the sound of it, both hands clasped to his head. And yet the man stood there in the loge, glowering, indignant and old and stubborn, with furrowed brows under his gray wig. I stepped back and leapt across the empty house, landing in the box directly before him, and his jaw fell in spite of himself, and his eyes grew hideously wide. He seemed deformed with age, his shoulders rounded, his hands gnarled, but the spirit in his eyes was beyond vanity and beyond compromise. His mouth hardened and his chin jutted, and from under his frock coat he pulled his pistol, and he aimed it at me with both hands. "Lestat!" Nicky shouted. But the shot exploded, and the ball hit me with full force. I didn't move. I stood as ready as the old man had stood before, and the pain rolled through me and stopped, leaving in its wake a terrible pulling in all my veins. The blood poured out. It flowed as I have never seen blood flow. It drenched my shirt, and I could feel it spilling down my back, and the pulling grew stronger and stronger, and a warm tingling sensation had commenced to spread across the surface of my back and chest. The man stared, dumbfounded. The pistol dropped out of his hand. His head went back, eyes blind, and his body crumpled, as if the air had been let out of it, and he lay on the floor. Nicky had raced up the stairs and was now rushing into the box. A low hysterical murmuring was issuing from him. He thought he was witnessing my death. And I stood still, hearkening to my body in that terrible solitude that had been mine since Magnus made me the vampire. And I knew the wounds were no longer there. The blood was drying on the silk vest, drawing on the back of my torn coat. My body throbbed where the bullet had passed through me, and my veins were alive with the same pulling, but the injury was no more. And Nicholas, coming to his senses as he looked at me, realized I was unharmed, though his reason told him it couldn't be true. I pushed past him and made for the stairs. He flung himself against me, and I threw him off. I couldn't stand the sight of him, the smell of him. "Get away from me," I said. But he came back again, and he locked his arm around my neck. His face was bloated, and there was an awful sound coming out of him. "Let me go! Nicky!" I threatened him. If I shoved him off too roughly, I'd tear his arms out of the sockets, break his back. Break his back. He moaned, stuttered, and for one harrowing split second, the sounds he made were as terrible as the sound that had come from my dying animal on the mountain, my horse, crushed like an insect into the snow. I scarcely knew what I was doing when I pried loose his hands. The crowd broke, screaming, when I walked out into the boulevard. Renaud ran forward in spite of those trying to restrain him. "Monsieur!" He grabbed my hand to kiss it and stopped, staring at the blood. "Nothing, my dear Renaud," I said to him, quite surprised at the steadiness of my voice and its softness. But something distracted me as I started to speak again, something I should hearken to, I thought vaguely, yet I went on. "Don't give it a thought, my dear Renaud," I said. "Stage blood, nothing but an illusion. It was all an illusion. A new kind of theatrical drama of the grotesque. Yes, the grotesque." But again came that distraction, something I was sensing in the melee around me, People shuffling and pushing to get close, but not too close. Nicholas, stunned and staring. Go on with your plays, I was saying, almost unable to concentrate on my own words. Your acrobats, your tragedies, your more civilized theatricals, if you like. I pulled the banknotes out of my pocket and put them in his unsteady hand. I spilled gold coins onto the pavement. The actors darted forward fearfully to gather them up. I scanned the crowds around for the source of this strange distraction. What was it? Not Nicholas in the door of the deserted theater, watching me with a broken soul. No, something else both familiar and unfamiliar, having to do with the dark. Hire the finest mummers, I was half babbling. The best musicians, the great scene painters. More banknotes. My voice was getting loud again, the vampire voice. I could see the grimaces again and the hands going up, but they were afraid to let me see them cover their ears. There is no limit to what you can do here. I broke away, dragging my roquelaire with me, the sword clanking awkwardly because it was not buckled right. Something of the dark. And I knew when I hurried into the first alley and started to run what it was that I had heard, what had distracted me. It had been the presence, undeniably, in the crowd. I knew it for one simple reason. I was running now in the back streets faster than a mortal can run, and the presence was keeping time with me, and the presence was more than one. I came to a halt when I knew it for certain. I was only a mile from the boulevard, and the crooked alley around me narrow and black as any in which I had ever been. And I already heard them. And I heard them before they seemed, quite purposefully and abruptly, to silence themselves. I was too anxious and miserable to play with them. I was too dazed. I shouted the old question, "Who are you? Speak to me!" The glass panes rattled in the nearby windows. Mortals stirred in their little chambers. There was no cemetery here. Answer me, you pack of cowards. Speak if you have a voice, or Speak if you have a voice, or once and for all get away from me. And then I knew, though how I knew, I can't tell you, that they could hear me, and they could answer me, if they chose. And I knew that what I had always heard was the irrepressible evidence of their proximity and their intensity, which they could disguise. But their thoughts they could cloak, and they had. I mean, they had intellect, and they had words. I let out a long, low breath. I was stung by their silence, but I was stung 1,000 times more by what had just happened. And as I'd done so many times in the past, I turned my back on them. They followed me. This time they followed. And no matter how swiftly I moved, they came on. And I did not lose the strange, toneless shimmer of them until I reached the Place de Grève and went into the Cathedral of Notre Dame. I spent the remainder of the night in the cathedral, huddled in a shadowy place by the right wall. I hungered for the blood I'd lost, and each time a mortal drew near, I felt a strong pulling and tingling where the wounds had been. But I waited, and when a young beggar woman with a little child approached, I knew the moment had come. She saw the dried blood and became frantic to get me to the nearby hospital, the Hotel Dieu. Her face was thin with hunger, but she tried to lift me herself with her little arms. I looked into her eyes until I saw them glaze over. I felt the heat of her breasts swelling beneath her rags. Her soft, succulent body tumbled against me, giving itself to me, as I nestled her in all the blood-stained brocade and lace. I kissed her, feeding on her heat, as I pushed the dirty cloth away from her throat, and I bent for the drink so skillfully that the sleepy child never saw it. Then I opened with careful, trembling fingers the child's ragged shirt. This was mine, too, this little neck. There weren't any words for the rapture, before I had all the ecstasy that rape could give, but these victims had been taken in the perfect semblance of love. The very blood seemed warmer with their innocence, richer with their goodness. I looked at them afterwards as they slept together in death. They had found no sanctuary in the cathedral on this night, and I knew my vision of the garden of savage beauty had been a true vision. There was meaning in the world, yes, and laws, and inevitably, but and inevitability, but they had only to do with the aesthetic. My apologies. And in this savage garden, these innocent ones belonged in the vampire's arms. A thousand other things can be said about the world, but only aesthetic principles can be verified, and these things alone remain the same. I was now ready to go home, and as I went out in the early morning, I knew that the last barrier between my appetite and the world had been dissolved. No one was safe from me now, no matter how innocent, and that included my dear friends at Renaud's, and it included my beloved Nikki. Now I got 10 minutes before I end. I might end the reading here, but I'm surprised I managed to get this far. How many chapters is left in part 3?
Go crazy with a blood rage and just kill everybody.
Okay.
The vampires, or is it like he found other vampires and got on?
I think it's more so his emotions when meeting Nikki again in the theater, because he was lost in the rapture of the music that he made, that it's like, I'm scared to meet him, but I want to. But I'm worried that he'll know of what I am now, that I'm not human. And that kind of fueled a little bit of a, not like a blood rage, but kind of a, like, ecstasy madness? I'm not sure what else to call it. There's just one more chapter in this part, and we can finish it. Let's just finish it. We got some time. It's not that long. It's only like 5 pages. Yeah, let's finish this part. What's that?
I said in the horniness of that.
At those mountains of horny. Anyways. Chapter 13. I wanted them gone from Paris. I wanted the playbills down, the doors shut. I wanted silence and darkness, and the little rat-trap theater where I had known the greatest and most sustained happiness of my mortal life. Not a dozen innocent victims a night could make me stop thinking about them, could make this ache in me dissolve. Every street in Paris led to their door. And an ugly shame came over me when I thought of my frightening them. How could I have done that to them? Why did I need to prove to myself with such violence that I could never be part of them again? No, I'd bought Renaud's. I'd turned it into the showcase of the boulevard. Now I would close it down. It was not that they suspected anything, however. They believed the simple, stupid excuses Roget gave them, that I was just back from the heat of the tropical colonies, that the good Paris wine had gone right to my head, plenty of money again to repair the damage. God only knows what they really thought. The fact was, they went back to regular performances the following evening, and the jaded crowds of the Boulevard du Temple undoubtedly put upon the mayhem a dozen sensible explanations. There was a queue under the chestnut trees. Only Nicky was having none of it. He had taken to heavy drinking and refused to return to the theater or study his music any more. He insulted Roget when he came to call. To the worst cafes and taverns he went, and wandered alone through the dangerous nighttime streets. Well, we have that in common, I thought. All this Roget told me as I paced the floor a good distance from the candle on his table, my face a mask of my true thoughts. Money doesn't mean very much to the young man, monsieur, he said. The young man has had plenty of money in his life, he reminds me. He says things that disturb me, monsieur. I don't like the sound of them. Roget looked like a nursery rhyme figure in his flannel cap and gown, legs and feet naked, because I had roused him again in the middle of the night and given him no time to put on his slippers, even, or to comb his hair. What does he say? I demanded. He talks about sorcery, monsieur. He says that you possess unusual powers. He speaks of La Voisin and the Chambre Ardente, an old case of sorcery under the Sun King, the witch who made charms and poisons for members of the court. Who would believe that trash now? I affected absolute bewilderment. The truth was, the hair was standing up on the back of my neck. Monsieur, he says bitter things, he went on. That your kind, as he puts it, has always had access to great secrets. He keeps speaking of some place in your town called the Witch's Place. My kind? That you are an aristocrat, monsieur, Roget said. He was a little embarrassed. When a man as angry as Monsieur de la Fawn is angry, these things come to be important. But he doesn't whisper his accusations to the others. He tells only me. He says that you will understand why he despises you. You have refused to share with him your discoveries. Yes, monsieur, your discoveries. He goes on about la voisin, about things between heaven and earth from which there are no rational explanations. He says he knows why you cried at the witch's place. I couldn't look at Roget for a moment. He was such a lovely perversion of everything, and yet it hit right at the truth. How gorgeous, and how